The case of Athena Strand. Athena Strand was born on May 25, 2015, in Duncan, Oklahoma, a small American town. Following her parents' divorce, her father relocated to Texas, while Athena remained with her mother in Oklahoma. Despite the distance, her father maintained regular contact, visiting her frequently, and her mother also made sure Athena spent quality time with him, given their amicable relationship. Later, both her parents remarried, and Athena gained two younger sisters, with whom she shared a strong bond, always seeking to spend as much time with them as possible. Athena was a cheerful child, always exuding positivity, with a passion for outdoor play and exploration. In late 2022, at the age of 7, she temporarily relocated to live with her father in Texas until the New Year holidays, after which she would return to her mother in Oklahoma. During her time in Texas, Athena attended a local elementary school. Her father's rural home, surrounded by woods and fields, provided the perfect setting for her to bond with her dad and his new wife, Elizabeth, in the beauty of nature. On November 30th, Athena returned home from school around 4:15 p.m., just like any other day. With her father and grandfather out hunting, she was left alone with Elizabeth. But that evening, Athena's mood was off, leading to an argument with Elizabeth. Upset, Athena retreated to her room, while Elizabeth headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner. 20 minutes later, Elizabeth went to call Athena for dinner, but she was nowhere to be found. Elizabeth searched the entire house and yard, but there was no sign of the girl. She then called her husband's relatives who lived nearby, but they claimed they hadn't seen Athena. Elizabeth then called her husband, explaining the situation, and he immediately told her to contact the police and rushed home. At 6:40, Elizabeth dialed 911, and officers arrived within 14 minutes. She recounted the events and shared her theory that Athena might have run away due to their argument. However, the girl's relatives remained skeptical, given Athena's age of 7 and her history of never straying far from home, especially at night when she was afraid of the dark. Initially, the police viewed Elizabeth with skepticism, primarily due to the 40-minute delay in reporting her child missing after realizing she was gone. However, after listening to her detailed account of searching the entire house and contacting relatives, they concluded that she was likely telling the truth. The officers promptly launched a search of the surrounding area, undeterred by the darkness, and meticulously combed through the forests and fields within a several-kilometer radius of the house. They focused their search on the area around the house, thinking Athena might have wandered off and got lost in the darkness, based on their main theory. While they also looked into the possibility of her being abducted, they didn't find any evidence to support this, since there was no sign of forced entry. Elizabeth didn't report hearing any noises or screams, and the neighbors didn't see anything suspicious that evening. Athena's relatives and concerned townspeople assisted the police in their search efforts. As soon as Athena's mother heard about her daughter's disappearance, she rushed to the scene. The search continued until almost 5 a.m., but they failed to find any signs of Athena. The area around the house, especially during dark hours, was difficult to access, which complicated the search. At 7 a.m., the police resumed their search, this time with more officers. As news of Athena's disappearance spread throughout the county, hundreds of volunteers joined the effort. Some volunteers searched the area on horseback and ATVs, while the police used drones and helicopters equipped with thermal cameras. Despite their efforts, Athena remained missing by the end of the day. The police were increasingly concerned for her life, given the onset of winter and the 50 degrees Fahrenheit temperature in Texas, which would have been challenging for Athena, who was wearing light clothing. On the third day, the police broadened their search to a radius of miles around the house, suspecting a potential criminal element in Athena's disappearance. Despite initial doubts that she had wandered off, they grew more convinced that she hadn't left the house voluntarily. Over the next few days, they scoured the surrounding area in all directions, covering several miles, but found no trace of the girl, as it seemed unlikely she could have walked that far without encountering anyone. Investigators sought to identify those near Athena's house that evening, a challenge due to the secluded location. However, they soon got a break. A courier service had delivered a package that same evening. FedEx led them to the responsible organization and the specific van, which was equipped with cameras, providing key surveillance footage. After rewinding the footage to the time when the van arrived at the house, investigators uncovered disturbing evidence. The footage showed the driver, later identified as 31-year-old Tanner Horner, pulling a girl who looked like Athena into the vehicle. The police promptly apprehended Tanner at his address on suspicion of abduction and took him in for questioning. Tanner confessed to delivering a package to Athena's house that evening. He hit her with his van while backing up, but she was conscious and uninjured. Athena told him her name, and they conversed. Panicked, Tanner put her in his van, unsure what to do. When Athena said she'd tell her father, Tanner's anxiety grew, fearing legal consequences if she told adults about the accident. After that, Tanner's bizarre confession left the investigators perplexed. He claimed that, in his words, killing her seemed the only viable option. First, he attempted to break her neck, but it didn't work, so he resorted to strangling her. Then, he transported her body to a nearby river and discarded it in the water. The police were naturally skeptical of this account, but Tanner provided them with the exact location where he had left Athena's body. They immediately went to the site and indeed found her remains. The news of the young girl's brutal murder sent shockwaves throughout the country, leaving her relatives and thousands of others stunned. As the case garnered widespread media attention, the public was horrified by the sheer cruelty of the crime. After the body was found, Tanner was charged with abduction and murder. As detectives awaited the medical examiner's report, they delved deeper into the criminal's identity, seeking to understand his motives. Tanner's version of events seemed utterly far-fetched. He claimed to have lightly struck the girl with his van, causing no serious harm. Yet, he was allegedly so terrified that he immediately decided to kill her, fearing that hitting a child without causing harm might only lead to his job loss. His story appeared highly improbable. Tanner, engaged with a year-old child, worked as an Uber driver and musician, performing in Fort Worth cafes. His social media showed a normal life, with photos of his child and musical performances. With no prior legal issues, there was no indication he was capable of cruel violence. 2 months prior to Athena's tragic death, the delivery man had shared photos on social media, showcasing heartwarming moments spent with his son and grandparents. The wait for the medical examiner's report, which was anticipated to clarify the exact sequence of events, dragged on for several weeks. During this time, Athena's grief-stricken parents took legal action against FedEx and the contracting company, alleging that they had failed to implement adequate employee screening measures, hence allowing Horner to continue working and paving the way for such a heinous crime. A devastating twist in this tragic tale emerged. The package Horner had delivered on that fateful evening was, in fact, a Christmas gift for Athena, a Barbie doll she had long coveted, which her parents had ordered for her. As the medical examiner's findings were made public, even more questions surfaced in the case. According to the document, the victim's death occurred within an hour of her abduction, with her body showing injuries of varying severity. The cause of death was asphyxiation. Initially, detectives believed that the killer, Horner, had abducted the girl to sexually assault her after spotting her near the house. However, medical experts found no evidence to support this theory, which puzzled the police. The detectives didn't believe the killer's account of events, as it lacked a logical explanation. They speculated that the perpetrator's initial plan was to sexually assault the girl, but something went awry. One theory is that after arguing with her father's wife, the victim went outside and was in the yard when Horner arrived to deliver a package. Noticing the girl alone and isolated, he saw an opportunity to act on his depraved fantasies. Horner could have lured the girl into his van through deception or attacked her to put her in the vehicle without a struggle. What happened next is unclear, with two main theories emerging. It's possible that Horner had planned to abduct the girl and take her far away from the house to commit his intended crimes. However, she may have started screaming or tried to escape, fearing capture, which led him to kill her. Afterwards, he dumped her body in the river. According to an alternative scenario, Horner might have engaged in inappropriate behavior towards the victim without physically touching her. In this case, a medical examination would not have revealed any evidence of sexual assault. The detectives stumbled upon an unexpected clue suggesting a sexual motive behind the crime. What was unusual about Horner was that he had no prior criminal record, which is rare in most cases. Typically, people who are capable of murder start with less severe crimes. The detective spent weeks meticulously investigating Horner's past, speaking to his relatives, friends, and acquaintances to uncover any hints of potential involvement in other crimes. Eventually, they made a breakthrough. The police identified several individuals who alleged they were victimized by Horner during their childhood. To protect the investigation, the authorities did not release the victims' identities or disclose full details of the incidents. However, it is known that one of the victims accused Horner of assaulting her 9 years prior. Additionally, he was charged with 3 counts of sexual assault involving minors in 2013, although it is unclear whether these incidents involved one or multiple victims. One of Horner's victims had been publicly sharing her story for years, describing how he assaulted her when she was 16. She used social media to raise awareness about Horner's criminal nature, but despite this, he faced no consequences and was not considered a suspect. The victim stated that for years, nobody believed her allegations. However, after Horner killed Athena, these allegations gained significant attention, revealing Horner's true character and possible motives. Horner faces multiple trials, including Athena's murder. A disturbing TikTok video shows him watching a bug being killed with a spray, his face showing an unsettling pleasure. This hints at sadistic tendencies, making his account of Athena's murder even more suspicious. Horner claimed he killed Athena to avoid punishment for a lesser crime, but this excuse seems absurd given his sadistic nature. Authorities are seeking the death penalty, backed by video footage and Horner's own testimony. His guilt is clear, and additional evidence may be presented during the trial. The case of Liana Friedenbach. Liana Friedenbach and Felipe Cafe, the young people involved in this tragedy, came from different backgrounds. Liana, born in May 1987 in São Paulo, was the elder of 2 children in a wealthy and respected family. Her father, Henry Friedenbach, was a successful lawyer and a well-known figure in the city. Felipe Silva Cafe, also from São Paulo, was born in July 1984, but grew up in a large, modest family. From a young age, he worked part-time to support himself and help his family. They met at school and developed a strong friendship that blossomed into romance. However, they had to keep their relationship a secret. Liana's parents, who were strict and religious, had brought her up to attend Sunday school and church regularly and were opposed to her dating at such a young age. Social inequality also contributed significantly to the situation, as she came from a wealthy family while her partner was from a poor background. However, the parents' prohibitions did not deter the young lovers from staying together. Instead, they started secretly dating in various locations where they would not be seen, just to spend some time together. In the fall of 2003, the lovers decided to take a trip to a secluded area to be alone for a while. They carefully planned the trip, which was meant to be an exciting adventure for them. They came up with a believable alibi to justify their absence and avoid arousing suspicion. Felipe told his parents that he and his friends were going on a camping trip. Liana, on the other hand, told her parents that she was going on a sightseeing trip with some guys from church, knowing that they would not question her further. The Friedenbach and Cafe families believed the fabricated stories and let their children go without any concerns. Liana and Felipe were overjoyed that they could spend a whole week together, free from their parents' scrutiny and judgment. The young couple decided to visit the picturesque province of Iguazu. They packed lightly, bringing a tent, sleeping bags, some personal items, and a small supply of food. However, they faced a significant challenge. They had hardly any money. As students, they were entitled to free public transportation, so they planned their route in advance to reach their destination by bus. On the morning of October 31st, the lovers met at the agreed meeting point, careful not to be seen by anyone who knew them. They caught the first bus and, after arriving in another city in the evening, spent the night at the bus station. 2 more bus rides took them to their desired location. From there, they had to walk a few kilometers to a secluded spot in the woods where they planned to camp and spend a few days alone together. Despite their fatigue after the long journey, the warm and sunny day put them in high spirits, and they joked, laughed, and made plans for their mini vacation. Once they reached the spot marked on their map, they began setting up their modest but cozy camp. Liana and Felipe's plans were ruined by unwelcome visitors. When they traveled to a remote and secluded area, they didn't consider that poverty and crime often thrive in such places. Their arrival didn't go unnoticed, especially since they were well-dressed and carrying large backpacks and bags as they walked through the forest to the abandoned farm where they planned to stay. They caught the attention of local bandits, Paulo Cesar de Silva Marquez, nicknamed Perron Buku, and Roberto Alves Cardoso, known as Chino, who was only 16 but already led the gang. The bandits were interested in the strangers, particularly the beautiful young girl. They decided that the backpacks likely contained valuables and could be robbed. The bandits secretly followed the couple and watched from the underbrush. Liana and Felipe set up their tent, had a snack, and began to clean up their campsite. The bandits waited in ambush until they were certain no one else would join the couple and that they didn't have any weapons. Pernambuco and Chino then attacked Liana and Felipe, threatening them, and Felipe, frightened, didn't even try to run away or fight back against the unknown attackers. Having thoroughly searched all the bags and backpacks, the criminals found nothing of value. They then decided to demand a ransom from the boys' and girls' relatives. Liana, terrified, quickly revealed that she came from a wealthy family, and her father would pay them any amount they demanded. The criminals were thrilled with this development, but lacking experience in such cases, they were unsure how to proceed to get the money and release the prisoners. As they refined their plan, the bandits tried to determine the value of their captives and the ransom they could demand. To prevent escape, they decided to hide the prisoners. Initially, they were taken to a rundown structure near the farm where they were staying, but it lacked windows and doors. Later, they were moved to the home of one of the gang members. There, Felipe was tied up and brutally beaten to prevent escape and resistance. That night, the gang members took turns abusing the bound and helpless Liana, ultimately breaking her spirit. The kidnappers were unable to figure out how to demand and collect a ransom, so they decided to kill the captives and hide their bodies in the woods, making it unlikely they would ever be found. After torturing the kidnappers took them to a remote area in the woods the following day. Pernambuco took the badly beaten Felipe deep into the forest, where a gunshot was heard, and then he returned alone. Liana realized what had happened and that her loved one was dead. Although the kidnappers tried to convince Liana that they had released Felipe, they had other sinister plans in mind for her. They intended to keep her captive as their plaything until they grew tired of her, especially since no one had begun searching for the missing boys at that time. A couple of days after Liana left, her parents discovered that there was no church excursion trip, and her friends were unaware of her whereabouts. The Friedenbach family suspected that Liana had run off with her boyfriend, Felipe, and immediately contacted his parents. However, Felipe's family believed he had gone camping with friends, so they couldn't assist in locating the couple. The situation was complicated by the fact that neither Liana nor Felipe had been in contact for several days, and their phones were turned off. Thanks to the Friedenbach family's connections and resources, they were able to mobilize the entire city's police force to track the couple's trail, step by step. Through trickery, they managed to reconstruct the route the young people took after running away from home. The police arrived at Embu Guasu, where the last bus had dropped them off, and from there they had to navigate through a deserted wooded area on foot. This was also the last location where their phones were still online. A massive search operation was launched, involving police officers, rescuers, and concerned citizens who had learned about the incident and wanted to help. A local businessman even offered his personal helicopter to aid in the search effort and distributed flyers with photos of the missing pair. The search party quickly found the couple's camp, but what they saw was chilling. Although there were no signs of bloodshed or struggle, it was clear that something horrific had taken place. The contents of their bags had been emptied and scattered about. Their tent had been sliced open from top to bottom with a knife, and the guys' phones were lying nearby. As the rescuers combed through the area, they soon stumbled upon Philippe's lifeless body. The young man had been shot in the back of the head at close range, and it was clear that he had never stood a chance. Although the chances of finding Liana alive were now extremely low, the searchers held on to hope, however slim. Henry Friedenbach actively sought the help of the press to widely publicize the search for Liana, ensuring that as many people as possible were aware of the situation. A substantial reward was offered for any information about her whereabouts, although unfortunately, this did not lead to a breakthrough in the case. Once the criminals had disposed of Felipe, they returned Liana to the same house where they had previously held both her and Felipe captive. By this time, the group of criminals had been joined by their accomplices, Antonio Gano da Silva and Agnaldo Pius Chino. Agnaldo, in particular, callously declared that Liana was now his property and that he had the freedom to do with her as he pleased. He then shockingly invited the others to indulge in their darkest desires with Liana, an invitation that was quickly accepted by the group. A day after the large-scale search operation began, the criminals relocated with their captive Liana to the house of Anthony Matias de Barros, another gang member. That evening, they took Liana with them when they went fishing. The ringleader showed a pretense of concern by putting his jacket over her due to the chilly weather. Later that evening, Chino's older brother, who was unaware of his siblings' illegal activities, arrived at the same location. Chino introduced Liana to his brother as his girlfriend, but the brother immediately recognized her as the girl the police were searching for. The brother took Chino aside and warned him that the police were closing in on them. Chino saw this as a warning and decided it was time to eliminate Liana and flee. He deceived Liana by telling her she was free to go and he would escort her to the road. However, he actually led her into the forest where he brutally stabbed her to death with a knife and then crushed her skull with a rock to ensure she was dead. Liana's body was discovered 5 days after the massacre, with no signs of life and severe mutilation. The key piece of evidence was the killer's jacket, which Liana was wearing. The perpetrators were not only cruel, cynical, and ruthless, but also incredibly stupid and short-sighted. Despite their brutality, they did not attempt to flee, hide, or destroy the physical evidence, believing they would never be caught. This overconfidence ultimately led to their quick identification and apprehension by the police. The ringleader, Chino, made a crucial mistake by leaving his jacket on Liana's body, which retained his sweat marks. He then took the murder weapon to his house, washing it and hiding it in the yard. He also tried to wash his blood-stained clothes so he could continue wearing them. However, DNA analysis ultimately linked the gang members to the crime, allowing the police to apprehend them almost simultaneously. The ringleader did not deny his involvement in the crime, and instead chose to testify, bragging about kidnapping, abusing, and ultimately killing the victim, Liana. He provided a detailed account of her final days. Following a lengthy trial, most adult members of the criminal gang received severe sentences. However, the ringleader, Chino, was only 16 at the time of the crimes, so he was sent to a specialized juvenile prison with a relatively lenient regime. During his incarceration, Chino made multiple escape attempts and exhibited aggressive and inappropriate behavior, which led to a psychiatric evaluation. The examination revealed several mental abnormalities, which cumulatively turned him into a calculating sadist and murderer devoid of pity or remorse. Chino, responsible for the murder of young men, was sent to a secure medical facility for mandatory treatment and rehabilitation, despite the family's numerous appeals. His living conditions are now comfortable, with a private room featuring a large TV, internet access, and a comfortable bed with an orthopedic mattress. He receives 4 balanced meals a day with a customized menu, and his monthly maintenance costs around approximately $2,500. In recent years, Chino has repeatedly requested his release, arguing that he has completed his treatment and no longer poses a threat to anyone, allowing him to resume his normal life. The case of Roxanne Valdez. Roxanne Valdez was born in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile, in 1957. Roxana Valdez was married to a man whose name remains undisclosed or unknown to the press. She had a son with him. It's clear that her marriage wasn't the dream every girl hopes for, as the couple eventually parted ways in 2011. As a single mother in a small village where jobs were scarce, Roxana faced significant challenges. In such communities, the primary occupation was growing and selling fruits and vegetables, and even the local educational institutions focused on agriculture. It was in this setting that Roxana found employment at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. She worked as a night supervisor at the school, ensuring that students slept at night and didn't engage in unruly activities. Her responsibilities didn't include the actual upbringing of the children. Roxana's son attended the same boarding school where she worked. As a single mother, she spent her days working in the fields, leaving her little time to devote to her son. At the school, Claudio Munoz Ramirez was the head of grounds maintenance. His night shifts often brought him into contact with Roxana, despite their 14-year age difference. They discovered common interests and bonded over their personal struggles. Roxana shared stories about the school and her failed marriage, while Claudio confided in her about his unhappy relationship with his wife and his adoration for his 2 daughters. Though he felt disconnected from his wife and had considered divorce, he remained in the marriage to honor a promise to his late father-in-law. Over time, Claudio's priorities shifted, and he began spending more time with Roxana, eventually leaving his family without explanation. Roxana welcomed him into her life, and their relationship accelerated rapidly. However, in her haste, she overlooked the fact that Claudio was temperamental and sometimes cruel, as well as the needs of her own children, who required constant attention. On a scheduled community cleanup day at the boarding school, Claudio's first serious outburst of aggression occurred. Students were assigned different areas to clean and were given the necessary supplies, including brooms, buckets, dustpans, and rags. However, some students refused to participate, which infuriated Claudio, who was in charge of cleanliness but lacked teaching experience. In the absence of teachers, he threatened to physically harm any student who didn't clean. Although it's unclear if he would have carried out this threat, the students eventually began cleaning. Later, they collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of violence, which displeased the principal. As a result, the principal asked Claudio to resign voluntarily. It's worth noting that the Don Gregorio boarding school was almost the only place in the area that offered stable and reasonably paid employment. Claudio initially spent some time searching for work in fields and at fruit stalls, but when his efforts proved unsuccessful, he and Roxana decided to seek a better life elsewhere. They left her son at the boarding school to continue his education, as they deemed it too risky to take him with them, fearing they would become too dependent on employers. Having already had a bad experience, the couple decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They relocated to the commune of Molina, a couple of hours' drive from the Chilean capital, which is renowned for its vineyards that produce well-known wine brands exported globally. Roxana and Claudio bought a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and took their first steps in their small family business. Claudio was responsible for purchasing and transporting products from suppliers to the kiosk, while Roxana handled sales throughout the day. They couldn't afford to hire an employee, as this would have meant additional expenses, and they were also concerned that an employee might not closely monitor the perishable goods, leading to further losses. Claudio was visibly upset and even angry when he found out that Roxana was pregnant with their first child together. He needed time to reflect on this, but Roxana, blinded by her new relationship and their thriving business, didn't disagree with his point of view. She agreed that after the child was born, they would give it to her relatives to raise. However, it turned out that there was no child to give away. Since then, Claudio's behavior changed drastically. He frequently yelled at his wife and occasionally resorted to physical violence. The neighbors, unhappy with the noisy disputes, often called the Chilean police, the carabineros, to intervene and calm the domestic disputes. On one occasion, the police responded to a distress call to find Roxana in a distraught state, crying and partially undressed, as she fled her home with Claudio chasing after her. When the officers arrived, Roxana broke down and confided in them, revealing that she had been a victim of ongoing domestic abuse, which had even led to her suffering a miscarriage. This traumatic experience had left her requiring psychological help. Nevertheless, as time passed, the couple appeared to put the incident behind them, and they resumed their life together as if the ordeal had never occurred. Despite the incident warranting criminal charges, Roxana showed compassion and gave Claudio a second chance, extracting a promise that it was an isolated incident. Claudio vowed to never again exhibit such behavior, but his history of abuse with his ex-wife cast doubt on his reliability. Sadly, the pattern of abuse persisted, and history repeated itself. Claudio stopped physically abusing Roxana, but started going out at night to drink excessively in local bars. He would spend a significant portion of their family's income not only on alcohol, but also on relationships with disreputable women. Roxana tolerated her husband's behavior, hoping that he would change once they had a child together. Her hope was partially fulfilled. In 2013, Roxana gave birth to a healthy child, and Claudio ended his partying lifestyle, diverting his attention to their business, which required expansion. They acquired another kiosk in a nearby area and an additional vehicle for transporting products. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection, as their work and living environments were not very safe. The family's wealth grew substantially, but it was only on paper. Despite this, Claudio went back to his old habits, wasting money on drinking and once again resorting to violence against Roxana at home. According to Roxana's testimony, the abuse she suffered at Claudio's hands continually worsened over time. At first, Claudio only drank occasionally, but he soon began to do so more and more frequently. When he came home drunk, he would accuse Roxana of being unfaithful, even though she was innocent, and this would lead to physical and sexual abuse, even when she was pregnant. Claudio's actions seemed intentionally designed to cause harm, and they ultimately led to Roxana having a miscarriage in August 2012, which sent her into a deep and prolonged depression. Claudio followed his usual routine by visiting a local bar one night, staying out until the next morning. Roxana, accustomed to his behavior, still worried about him. However, it turned out that Claudio had stolen 5 million Chilean pesos, equivalent to around $6,000, from their daughter's room. The money, earned from selling Roxana's mother's house, was intended for their joint business venture. Roxana was shocked and felt betrayed by Claudio's actions, which he used to fund his excessive drinking and brothel visits. When Claudio finally returned home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. Instead of discussing the issue, Claudio assaulted her and confessed to squandering the entire amount. This was the final straw for Roxana, who, without hesitation, went to their bedroom, retrieved a .38 caliber revolver intended for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest at close range. The shot proved fatal, and Claudio died instantly. Roxana was taken aback by her own drastic actions and attempted to stop the bleeding from the gunshot wound, but it was too late. Her desperate act marked a tragic end to the ongoing turmoil in their domestic life. In her testimony, Roxana expressed deep remorse and acknowledged the immorality of her actions. She confessed that her intention was to kill Claudio, not intimidate him, citing the numerous instances of abuse and assault she had suffered at his hands. Roxana regretted not reporting these incidents to the authorities or withdrawing her complaint out of fear, even before they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's primary concern was the potential impact on their young daughter, particularly if she were imprisoned and the child were sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided the best course of action would be to dispose of the body and report Claudio missing. Aware that his frequent drinking binges that often led to his disappearance were well known to the police. Roxana found disposing of the body a daunting task. She decided to dismember it piece by piece, initially using 5 kitchen knives intended for meat cutting to sever the limbs and head as they kept dulling. She then boiled the dismembered parts in her largest pots, all while interacting with her young daughter, who remained oblivious to her mother's actions and her father's fate. The following day, Roxana packed the cooled body parts into plastic containers, organizing them separately: hands, legs, head, and torso. Each container was then placed in a separate garbage bag. She loaded the bags into her car and drove to St. Lucia, intending to scatter them on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she thoroughly cleaned her house with bleach. However, upon arriving at the designated site, Roxana couldn't muster the courage to dispose of the bags, despite finding a suitable location. In her testimony, Roxana expressed her internal conflict, stating that it was strange she had the bravery to commit the heinous crime and dismember a human body as if it were an animal. But she couldn't bring herself to dispose of the evidence. She mentioned being nervous throughout the drive, feeling constantly watched, fearing the police would stop and search her car at any moment. This fear led to panic, even though she had a backup plan involving her daughter, pretending to rush her to the hospital if stopped. She even thought of how to make her cry louder by pinching her. Roxana was unable to get rid of the remains, so she took them back home and hid them in the garage. She then thoroughly cleaned the interior of her car with bleach. Next, she visited Claudio's relatives, telling them that he had stolen a large amount of money and had been absent for days. They didn't seem to care, simply shrugging in response. After that, Roxana visited her mother and brother. Her mother was extremely concerned about Roxana's behavior, noticing that she hadn't eaten, had a glazed expression, and kept asking the same questions over and over. The only question Roxana answered quickly was when her mother asked about Claudio's whereabouts, saying that he had gone to buy supplies for their store, but had gotten a flat tire and was delayed getting back home. Alone with her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down and called her brother for help. When he arrived, she confessed everything, sharing the nightmarish years she endured with Claudio, and showed him the containers holding the body. Her brother was shocked, but instead of offering help, he refused, fearing police involvement and the possibility of being charged as an accomplice. He urged Roxana to confess to the carabineros, insisting he would do it if she didn't. Disappointed but realizing she had no other choice, Roxana decided to take his advice. That night, she went to the 4th police station, announcing her intention to make an important statement. The officers, familiar with her husband's troublesome behavior, initially thought she wanted to report him again. However, they were shocked by her confession. Roxana was immediately arrested, and the news spread rapidly throughout the area, attracting a swarm of journalists around the station. The case against Roxana seemed clear-cut. She had confessed to the crime, provided evidence, and surrendered voluntarily. However, prosecutor Monica Besis was not convinced. She was skeptical about the ease with which Roxana had confessed and wanted to investigate further. Besis requested an extension of Roxana's arrest to conduct a forensic examination, hoping to prove that her victim, Claudio, was still alive when she dismembered him. This would have significantly increased Roxana's sentence. The judge agreed to a 60-day detention for further investigation. Meanwhile, Roxana's defense attorney, Carolina Gutierrez, argued that Roxana had acted while under extreme emotional distress, possibly exacerbated by postpartum depression and chronic domestic abuse. She pointed out that Roxana's cooperation and voluntary confession should be considered mitigating factors. However, the prosecution's theory that Claudio was alive during the dismemberment was later disproven by forensic results, which confirmed that Claudio had died from a gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet from the .38 caliber revolver had caused a heart rupture and damaged vital organs. Following these developments, the aggravating circumstances were dismissed. In a separate development, lawyer Juan Pablo Cardenas, who was seeking to make a name for himself in this high-profile case, noted that the firearm used in the murder was legally registered. He also pointed out that Roxana's first report of domestic violence to the police was filed just 20 days after the couple started living together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela submitted documents to the court after a medical examination stating that Roxana was extremely mentally unstable at the time of the crime. According to his findings, she lacked full awareness of her actions and suffered from emotional instability, which was linked to the recent loss of 2 children, one in August 2012 and another just 3 weeks before the crime. Prosecutors' forensic exam showed Claudio's blood alcohol level was 3 Gr/L at death on April 17, 2015. After a year of investigation, Roxana's trial began. The media dubbed it the Melina Cooks case and sensationalized it, claiming Roxana ate part of the remains to attract attention. Distressed, Roxana refused to make statements during the trial. The prosecutors attempted to sway the judge's opinion by highlighting that, according to Chilean law, Roxana had committed a serious offense, the murder of her own father, patricide, although they failed to provide evidence that the crime was premeditated. In contrast, the defense attorney countered that his client had acted in self-defense, protecting herself from a violent aggressor who had subjected her to years of abuse and mistreatment. The trial, which lasted several weeks, was closely followed by the entire population of Chile. Prosecutor Monica requested a 15-year prison sentence for Roxana, but after careful consideration of the defense and the jury's opinion, the judges sentenced her to 6 years in a correctional facility with a lenient regime. Claudio's relatives, who had been hoping for a life sentence or even the death penalty, were outraged when they heard the prosecutor's request for only 15 years. They were devastated by the court's decision and rejected any suggestion of violence within the family. They argued that Claudio, a successful businessman, could not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana, and claimed that he had confessed to them that Roxana had often threatened to kill him, having previously taken out a revolver from the closet and warned him of her intentions. Claudio's sister blamed Chile's system of justice, claiming it to be corrupt, as evidenced by the short sentences given to brutal criminals, similar to those for minor robberies. Claudio's first wife, Giselle, defended him, asserting that he was not violent, based on her experience of living with him for many years without incident. In contrast, Roxana was prone to jealous outbursts and possessiveness, often sparking disputes. Roxana's sentence was shortened due to good behavior, and she was transferred to a semi-open education center, where she was allowed to communicate with her daughter. Eventually, she was released early, sparking widespread outrage among the public, who felt that the cook from Melina was let off lightly. However, some people saw Roxana as a victim and justified her actions, despite considering her a murderer. This case continues to be debated in the country, highlighting the severe consequences of unchecked domestic violence. The case of Varka Rani. In 2012, Jasveer Ram Ginde, a 29-year-old banker, lived in Wawal town, England, while his parents resided in India. They would frequently call him, urging him to get married since he had reached a marriageable age. Jasveer, however, would consistently ignore their requests until he finally relented in 2012. His parents were overjoyed by his decision and immediately started searching for a suitable bride for their son. In October 2012, Jasveer visited India and reunited with his parents after many years. They showed him photographs of several potential brides, but he didn't find any of them appealing. A relative then suggested a girl named Varka Rani, whom they had discovered on a matrimonial website. Jasveer's parents were impressed by her profile and showed it to their son. Jasveer was immediately drawn to her picture, and his parents subsequently contacted Varka's parents to arrange a meeting between the two families. During this meeting, Varka and Jasveer were introduced to each other, and after conversing for a while, they found themselves compatible. Talks of their marriage began, and a wedding date was eventually set. Let's take a step back and learn about Varka's background. Varka Rani, who lived in Marbagh Singh Nagar, Punjab, was 24 years old when Jasveer, 29, came into her life. After graduating, Varka pursued a degree in information technology and had a passion for studying, earning degrees in 4 different courses at a young age. She was the apple of her family's eye. As she approached a suitable age for marriage, her family, with her consent, created a profile for her on a matrimonial site. Through this platform, Varka found her life partner, and Jasveer planned to take her to England after their wedding. Varka's family was overjoyed, knowing that her academic achievements would make it easy for her to find a job in England as well. On March 28, 2013, Jasveer and Varka tied the knot in a traditional Indian wedding, which was a lavish affair with around 700 guests in attendance. However, shortly after the celebration, Jasveer had to return to England, while Varka's visa was still pending approval. During this period, Varka applied for an England visa, but Jasveer had already reached England. Meanwhile, Varka was eagerly waiting for her visa in India. Eventually, her wait ended, and in July, she booked a ticket to join her husband in England. Finally, on August 10, 2013, Varka arrived in England, reuniting with Jasveer. In the vicinity of Jasveer's house, there was a crematorium where the dead were cremated. The pungent smell of burning human flesh would often spread through the air when someone's funeral rites were performed, causing discomfort to Jasveer and those around him for a few hours. Now, it was September 12, 2013, and Varka had been in England for about a month. On that night, smoke began billowing from Jasveer and Varka's house, alarming their neighbors. To investigate the source of the smoke, 2 or 3 neighbors visited Jasveer's house. When they rang the doorbell, Jasveer initially didn't respond. However, when he eventually opened the door, one of the neighbors asked what was causing the smoke and smell of burning flesh in his house so late at night. In reality, no human cremation had taken place at the crematorium that day. In response, Jasveer explained that they had cleaned their house that day, accumulated some garbage, and were just burning it in the furnace, which might have been causing the smell. Hearing this, the neighbors went back to their homes, but after some time, a very strong smell started emanating again from Jasveer's house. Because of this, it became difficult for the neighbors to breathe, so one of them called the police to complain. A few minutes later, the police arrived at Jasveer's house, responding to reports from neighbors about a strange smell emanating from the residence. Jasveer provided the same evasive answers to the police's inquiries as he had to his neighbors. The police then conducted a search of Jasveer's house, discovering a 22-inch furnace in which he was burning household trash. Following their inspection, the police departed, but Jasvier subsequently went to the police station to file a complaint against his wife. In his statement, he alleged that Varka had deceived him, marrying him only to secure a pathway to England from India. According to Jasvier, the two had argued that morning, and in the evening, Varka had taken $500 and left his house. After hearing Jasvier's story, the police assured him that they would find Varka soon. Following up on his complaint, Jasvier returned home and promptly called his parents in India, recounting the entire ordeal. By the next morning, Jasvier's parents had also informed Varka's family about Varka's actions. However, on the morning of September 13th, Jasvier again burned the pot inside his house. Smoke billowed out, accompanied by a peculiar and pungent smell. This time, the neighbors found the situation utterly bizarre, prompting them to call the police once more. When the police arrived at Jasvier's house that morning, they told him that his neighbors were distressed due to his actions. The overpowering smell compelled the police to investigate its source, and they attempted to enter Jasvier's house. Without hesitation, Jasvier guided the police to his garden. The police conducted a thorough search of the entire garden, but yielded nothing. Just as they were about to leave Jasvier's house, a female officer spotted a furnace nearby, still burning with a flickering flame inside. As she removed the lid, she let out a blood-curdling scream, prompting the other officers to converge on the furnace. Inside, the officer had discovered a charred human body, the skin completely incinerated, leaving only skeletal remains. The police wasted no time in arresting Jasvier. A team of forensic experts was subsequently summoned to the scene. The severely burned body made it challenging for even the forensic pathologist to determine its gender. However, a few personal items were recovered from the furnace, including a bracelet, necklace, and ring. Following a meticulous forensic examination of the entire house, the police sequestered some of Jasvier's personal belongings, including his phone, iPad, and notably a wedding album featuring Varka and Jasvier. After meticulous scrutiny of the photos, the police made a startling discovery. Varka was wearing the same jewelry later found in the furnace by the forensic team. This revelation sparked a crucial question: did the remains belong to Varka? With these suspicions in mind, the police turned their attention to Jasvier, grilling him about his wife's whereabouts. Initially, Jasvier feigned ignorance, claiming Varka had deceived him and fled. But when confronted with the incriminating evidence gathered by forensic experts, he became visibly agitated. His story promptly shifted as he attempted to spin a new narrative for the police. Jasvier and Varka got married in March 2013, but he was initially hesitant. He was won over by her charm, and they had a grand celebration. A few months later, Varka moved to England, but then confessed she had only married him to gain independence and move. Jasvier was furious, and their arguments escalated, including a nasty fight on September 12th. Later, when Varka failed to return home at night, Jasvier's worry turned to alarm, prompting him to file a complaint at the police station. However, the police were skeptical of Jasvier's story. They subsequently questioned Jasvier's neighbors and friends, who described Varka as friendly, polite, and well-liked, while Jasvier's friends reluctantly shared disturbing details about his preference for men over women. Undeterred, Jasvier continued to fabricate stories to mislead the police. However, their investigation uncovered incriminating photos on Jasvier's iPad, which revealed a telling aspect of his personality. The police then intensified their interrogation, and Jasvier eventually cracked under the pressure, recounting a vastly different story. Jasvier confessed to the police that he had a violent fight with Varka on September 12th, during which he lost control and choked her with a vacuum cleaner pipe, resulting in her tragic death. He then transported her body to the garden, where a furnace was located, and burned it. However, this wasn't Jasvier's true story. In reality, Jasvier had known he was gay and attracted to men since he was 12. After completing his education in India, he moved to England, where he landed a job at a bank. In 2008, he began a relationship with a gay man and had also confided in some close friends about his sexual orientation. In 2013, Jasvir's family began pressuring him to get married soon. Unwilling to reveal his true identity to his family, Jasvir agreed to marry Varka. After bringing Varka to England, their relationship remained platonic. However, when Varka discovered inappropriate pictures of Jasvir with his gay partner on his iPad, their disagreements turned into arguments, with Varka threatening to expose Jasvir's secret to his family. Jasvir was consumed by rage when he strangled Varka, ultimately leading to her death. In an attempt to dispose of her body, he burned her in the furnace, but the pungent smell of burning flesh alerted the neighbors, who promptly notified the authorities. On the morning of September 13th, Jasvir returned to the furnace, only to find that some remains were still intact, prompting him to douse the body with petrol and set it ablaze once more. However, the putrid smell spread again, and when the police arrived at Jasvir's doorstep for the second time, they apprehended him as the husband who had murdered his new bride upon her discovery of his sexual orientation. Jasvir, a native of Warsaw, brutally killed Varka Rani just a few months into their marriage. The news sent shockwaves through both Jasvir's and Varka's families. Jasvir's family struggled to come to terms with their son's sexuality, while Varka's family was consumed by grief. The evidence against Jasvir was overwhelming, and he was subsequently taken into custody and brought to trial at Wolverhampton Crown Court. Although Jasvir initially attempted to denial and deceive to avoid punishment, he was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment after a grueling 3-month trial. Furthermore, he would be ineligible for parole for at least 20 years. The case of Kathy Martin. Kathy Martin was born on October 25, 1959, in Houston, Texas, and grew up in a loving family where she was especially close to her sister. In high school, she met Mike, and a few years later, they tied the knot. The couple settled in a quiet Houston suburb, where they soon started a family with the birth of their daughter. 3 years later, Kathy became pregnant again, and in early 1987, they welcomed a son. At just 27 years old, Kathy was now a mother of 2. After her second child was born, Kathy dedicated herself to full-time motherhood, focusing on raising her children. Mike worked at his father-in-law's small sign factory, providing a stable income for the family. Kathy's parents also offered financial support, enabling her to devote all her time to the kids. On March 3, 1987, Kathy was at home with the children as usual, while Mike was at work. After his shift ended, he decided to meet up with friends and headed to a bar. Mike attempted to call his wife from a payphone, but she didn't answer, a rare occurrence, as Kathy rarely had the chance to leave the house even for a few minutes. Mike tried calling her several more times, but still got no response. Worried, Mike called their neighbor, Tim, and asked him to check on Kathy. Tim went to their house and knocked on the door, but received no answer. Peering through the living room window, he noticed the TV was on, so he persisted in knocking, but there was only silence. Tim's concern grew that something might have happened to Kathy. Rather than returning home to call Mike or the police, he got in his car and drove around town searching for patrol officers. After a few minutes of driving, he spotted a police car and explained the situation to the officers, requesting they check on Kathy. When the police arrived at the house and received no response to their knock, they tried the door handle and found it unlocked. Upon entering the house, they immediately found Kathy's daughter lying on the living room sofa, unconscious and displaying visible signs of trauma, but still alive. The officers quickly called for an ambulance and continued to inspect the other rooms. In the bedroom, the officers found the younger child in his crib, safe and unharmed. However, in another room, they were met with a gruesome scene. Kathy lay on the floor, bloodied and lifeless. She was naked, and the police quickly determined that she was the victim of a heinous crime. Her hands were bound with a lamp cord, a disturbing indicator of the brutality she had endured. The paramedics rushed Kathy's daughter to the hospital, and the investigators began meticulously examining the crime scene. Kathy's father arrived shortly after, but the police withheld the details of the tragedy from him. Instead, they requested that he go to the hospital to be with his granddaughter when she awoke. As Kathy's father waited at the hospital, he was shocked to learn about his daughter's murder from a news report on TV. Meanwhile, Mike arrived at the house, and the police were immediately struck by his suspicious behavior. Not only did he show up late, but there were also telltale bloodstains on his shirt. The police asked him to surrender his clothes and answer their questions, their scrutiny intensifying with each passing moment. Investigators made several intriguing discoveries. Firstly, they found numerous bloodstains in the bathroom, indicating that the perpetrator had attempted to clean up the crime scene. This suggested that the attacker had lingered in the house for some time, rather than fleeing immediately after the murder. Secondly, forensic experts detected no signs of forced entry. All windows and doors, except the front door, were locked, implying that Kathy either let the attacker in voluntarily or they had a key. The police also observed another peculiar detail. All of Kathy's clothes were neatly folded on the floor beside her body. This not only hinted at the possibility of sexual assault, but also seemed strange that the attacker had taken the time to fold her clothes with such care. The detectives hypothesized that the assailant might have threatened to harm her children if she screamed or refused to comply with their demands. Kathy may have acquiesced to their demands solely to protect her children, only to be killed afterwards. Kathy's daughter was fighting for her life after being brutally beaten, likely with bare hands. After several hours in the hospital, she fell into a coma, and her chances of survival remained dire. Medical experts examined Kathy's body and determined that she had suffered 16 stab wounds, primarily in the abdominal area. They also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and managed to extract biological material from the perpetrator. However, during that time, DNA analysis was not yet widely used in forensic science, so the experts could only determine the perpetrator's blood type. From the early hours of the investigation, the police zeroed in on the victim's husband, Mike, after noticing suspicious stains on his shirt. They seized his clothing for examination, and Mike's behavior that evening also raised eyebrows. After work, he went out with friends, but instead of going home, he asked a neighbor, Tim, to check on his wife, a tactic detectives had seen before, where a husband committed the murder and created an alibi. The police also uncovered that Mike had a checkered past. Right after high school, he was arrested for selling drugs to an undercover cop and was sentenced to 6 years in prison, although he only served 2 before being released on parole. Later, he married Kathy, but the police needed more evidence to charge him. The detectives also launched an investigation into Tim, the neighbor, whose behavior seemed suspicious. Rather than calling the police from his home, he drove around town searching for patrol officers. A search of Tim's car revealed suspicious stains on the floor mats that resembled blood. Forensic experts determined that Kathy's death had occurred around 10 p.m., approximately 6 hours before her body was discovered. This led the detectives to probe the suspect's whereabouts long before the evening and their actions after the murder. Both Mike and Tim claimed to have been at work, prompting the police to verify their alibis. 2 days after the murder, the hospital contacted the detectives with a breakthrough. Kathy's daughter had suddenly regained consciousness, and her life was no longer in danger. Investigators rushed to interview her, hoping she could provide insight into the events, but the 4-year-old girl had almost completely lost her memory of that day. She vaguely recalled a man with light hair entering their house, though both her father and Tim had dark hair. The detectives received an unexpected update from the lab, forcing them to reassess the case. The experts' analysis revealed that the stains on the neighbor's car mats were mere machine oil, and those on the husband's shirt were just paint. Furthermore, multiple colleagues of Mike and Tim, who worked in different fields, corroborated that the 2 men had been at their workplaces all day and hadn't left until evening. This eliminated both men as suspects, as they hadn't had the opportunity to commit the crime at Kathy's house. The police, who had been convinced of one of the suspects' involvement, found themselves back at the starting point. They refocused on other potential suspects familiar with the victim and capable of entering her house without raising suspicions. As detectives questioned Kathy's relatives and friends, asking who they thought might be responsible, they discovered an intriguing pattern. Many of them, without hesitation, named one person, Greg. Greg, Kathy's brother-in-law, was flagged as a suspect due to his troublesome behavior, which her loved ones revealed she had frequently complained about. According to Kathy, Greg would openly flirt with her and persistently try to persuade her into intimate encounters. Moreover, he would often make inappropriate remarks about her stomach, a detail that aligned with the majority of stab wounds being located in that area. The police investigation uncovered Greg's history of illegal substance abuse and criminal past, prompting detectives to focus on him. They soon found a promising lead, a fingerprint and hair at Kathy's house matching Greg's. However, this evidence was not conclusive, as Greg regularly visited Kathy and her husband, potentially leaving behind the prints and hair prior to the murder. Kathy's parents were convinced of Greg's guilt. Her mother shared a telling anecdote. During a late-night hospital visit with her granddaughter, Greg appeared, causing the girl to glance at her grandmother with an unmistakable look of fear. After hearing this testimony, the detectives summoned Greg for questioning. He categorically denied any involvement in the murder, claiming to have been with a friend at the time, a friend with a notable criminal record. Mid-interrogation, Greg requested a brief absence to pay for additional parking time, allegedly to avoid a ticket, but he never returned to the station. Greg's wife's sister later recounted that on the day of the murder, Greg dropped her off at work around 10:30 a.m. and picked her up at 2:30 p.m., leaving him a 4-hour window that coincided with the time of the murder, providing a plausible opportunity to kill Kathy. Despite these suspicious circumstances, the police still lacked concrete evidence to link Greg to the crime. As a last resort, they decided to analyze the semen sample taken from the victim's body. At the time, forensic experts could only determine the blood type of the sample's owner. The blood type of the sample from Kathy's body matched Greg's, but this finding did not conclusively prove his guilt. Investigators were unable to make an arrest based on the available evidence, prompting a continued search for additional proof. However, despite their efforts, they were ultimately unable to prove Greg's involvement. The case eventually stalled, leaving Kathy's family frustrated and convinced of Greg's guilt, yet powerless to act. Meanwhile, Shelley, Kathy's sister, refused to accept that her husband was capable of such a heinous crime and chose to continue living with him in the years that followed. Detectives revisited the case in 1998, 11 years after the murder, seeking DNA analysis on the remaining semen sample. However, they only got a partial DNA profile, which showed Greg belonged to the 2% of the population matching it. When questioned, Greg changed his story, claiming a consensual relationship with Kathy, but detectives were skeptical, knowing such shifts are common in murder cases. Despite suspicions, they couldn't convict without a full DNA match, and the case went cold again. In 2002, detectives revived the investigation, enlisting the expertise of forensic scientist Catherine Long, a pioneer in DNA research. She and her team aimed to determine whether a perpetrator's DNA could linger on the victim's body after strangulation, and if so, whether it could be extracted for analysis. To test this theory, Catherine and her colleagues simulated strangulation, squeezing each other's necks, and then collected samples from their hands and the neck area. The results were striking. Even brief contact left behind sufficient skin particles for DNA analysis. Detectives re-examined Kathy's case, focusing on the lamp cord used to bind her hands. Since only the killer could have tightened it, they handed it over to Catherine for DNA analysis. Stored in a paper bag, the cord was swabbed from end to end, including blood-stained areas. 2 DNA profiles emerged, Kathy's and Greg's, providing strong evidence that Greg was the killer. 15 years after the murder, the suspect was arrested and denied involvement, claiming a romantic relationship with Kathy. However, DNA evidence led to his trial. While in prison, his cellmate reported that Greg confessed to the crime, boasting about killing Kathy after she resisted his advances and threatening to harm her son if she didn't comply. The detectives were convinced of the cellmate's veracity, given that he couldn't have possibly divined so many crucial details, even if he had carefully read about the case in the news. Empowered by the cellmate's testimony, the detectives confronted Greg, and this time, he finally broke down and confessed. He acknowledged his guilt in Kathy's murder, repeating the same admission he had made to his cellmate. Subsequently, he pleaded guilty in court and was handed a 45-year prison sentence, though he ultimately served only 4 years before succumbing to liver cancer at the age of 56. Kathy's husband, Mike, tragically didn't live to see the day of the killer's arrest, passing away at the age of 45. Her children and parents expressed gratitude to the detectives for finally bringing the case to a close, albeit 15 years later. Throughout that long and arduous wait, they had been almost certain that Greg was the perpetrator, yet they were forced to watch him continue living with their second daughter, powerless to intervene.